Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Alpha's Obsession by Donna Grant, narrated by Victoria Mcgloven. Chapter 1. Achill Island, Ireland. End of July. Tonight was the same as countless others. Same captivating speech by her brother. Same engrossed faces, watching him with a mixture of awe and reverence. Same security in place, ensuring that the star, her sibling, was safe. But something was off. Fiona methodically scanned the faces in the room, looking for anything that might tell her who was responsible. But no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find it. No one appeared out of place. Then again, few rarely did during the first meetings, because that's what this was. The first of 3 gatherings before Donna chose who would be welcomed into their organization. She remained in the shadows, inspecting each face of the 30 gathered to put them to memory. It was her duty to spot trouble, and she was damned good at it. While her brother had a silver tongue that could enrapture a room with just a few words, her skills ran to battle, weapons, and magic. She detested being the center of attention and was quite happy fading into the background. Movement out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. She turned her head and spotted her brother as he made his way to the makeshift stage that had been erected just for him in the ballroom. Their gazes briefly met. Donna shot her a wink before he put a huge smile on his face and waved to the gathered crowd. She had no idea how he did this night after night. He thrived on it, while the very thought of repeating the speeches made her want to gouge her eyes out. Then again, Donna didn't understand why she loved to train daily, or got such a thrill from maintaining his security. They were, as their father often said, as different as night and day. Fiona looked to the door and saw latecomers entering, just as her brother's voice filled the room. She paid no attention to Donna. Her job was to keep an eye on those who attended in case anyone made an attempt on her sibling's life. Few truly understood how important Donna was. But they would soon enough. Everyone always did. The entirety of her and Donna's lives had led up to what was about to come to fruition. Fiona had trained tirelessly, became proficient at ancient magic that had been forgotten, and learned to fight with a unique set of weapons, while Donna had absorbed knowledge from archaic scrolls and perfected his speaking voice. Fiona waited until the door had closed behind the last individual before she made her way around the perimeter of the room. Their meeting place was none other than Moor Hall. It had a striking edifice with dark grey stone set against the vibrant, verdant surroundings. At times, she gazed upon the splendour of the manor and felt sorry that humans couldn't witness such breathtaking grandeur. Thanks to Fae magic, the mortals believed the manor was haunted and nothing but a crumbling house that had been neglected and forgotten. Fiona moved slowly, keeping far from the guests. Her security team was set up throughout the house. Some were stationed purposefully to be seen, while others were hidden so as not to draw attention to themselves. Once she made it to the other side of the stage, she sat up in her customary position and continued scrutinizing those gathered. With her brother's voice droning on in the background, she noticed that most laughed at his jokes, nodded their heads in agreement, or clapped with enthusiasm at his comments. But not everyone. Her attention locked on the 3 who did none of those things. 2 males stood at the back with their arms crossed over their chests and looks of discontent on their faces. Their heads were tilted towards each other as they spoke in whispers, alerting her that they had most likely come together. She nodded to 2 guards nearest the pair and jerked her chin to the men. Her people had stationed themselves to intervene, should it become necessary. and a couple of times it had been necessary. People didn't always like what Dorcha had to say, but it needed to be said, and if he were the only one strong and brave enough to say it, then it fell to him. Fianna would be there to make sure no harm came to him. He had a great destiny ahead of him, a calling that would change the Fae forever. Her gaze slid to the other guest, who made no motion of agreement in reaction to her brother's words. The male stood tall, his gaze steady as he observed Dorcha. Fianna leaned to the side to get a better view of him. He wore a black leather racing jacket over a solid grey tee, which prohibited her from seeing more of his physique other than his broad shoulders. His thick black hair was trimmed short, the kind of cut a male wore when he didn't want to be bothered with styling his hair. He had a strong, clean jawline, a regal nose, and full and utterly sexy lips. Handsome? He was definitely that. But there was something else about him, an air of danger, maybe. The fact that she couldn't figure him out as she did others intrigued her. Perhaps a little too much, because she could never turn away from a puzzle. And he was, without a doubt, a mystery. He shifted slightly, taking in a deep breath that lifted his shoulders as he stuffed his fingers into the front pockets of his jeans. She noticed his gaze moving about as if he was sizing up those around him. Fianna was instantly on alert. The first meetings brought in all sorts of Fae, and the larger crowds made her extra vigilant. However, she had to remind herself that this gathering was one that led to something special, as all first meetings did. Perhaps this male suspected that and was looking out for himself. Her stomach fluttered when the Fae's lips suddenly turned up slightly at the corners, transforming his handsome face into something breathtaking. Fianna instinctively took a step back. She wanted to run to her room and put as much distance between herself and the male as she could, forget every second since she had laid eyes on him. But that wasn't an option for her. Not now, at least. She forced herself to hold her ground and look anywhere but at his face. Little by little, she gained control of her suddenly erratic and foolish emotions. It had been a long time since she had been so overcome. She was grateful that neither Dorcha nor her father had witnessed the episode. Yet even when she had control of herself, she didn't dare look at the Fae again. That would be idiotic, and she was anything but. Well, most days anyway. One of the female guards took a half-step forward from her position, drawing Fianna's gaze. Fianna followed the guard's line of sight and saw what had gotten her attention. One of the guests had noticed that the male she had been ogling, or rather watching, hadn't been smiling or clapping. The guest's growing frown alerted Fianna that he was about to take action. She snapped her gaze to the guard nearest the male and gave a nod. Dorcha's meetings had a way of exciting most in the room to his cause, and, sometimes, they took it as an insult when others didn't display the same sort of enthusiasm. Fianna had trained her people well. There was no need to tell them what to do as they observed everything. They all noticed what was going on and simply waited for her to give the cue. Fianna watched as the guard came up alongside the riled guest and said a few words in his ear. The Fae instantly calmed and returned to his position, and just like that, the situation was diffused. Unable to help herself, Fianna's gaze swung back to the Fae who had caused such a stir, in both the other guest and her, only to find his eyes locked on her. Her lungs seized, her heart skipped a beat, and the very air became charged with surprise and curiosity. She was hidden, and yet this Fae had somehow located her. She was captivated. That, in combination with her reaction to him, was a sign that she should stay far, far away from him. The Fae bowed his head to her as he went back to listening to Donna. But Fianna wasn't fooled. He had been good enough to detect her, which meant he was skilled, the kind of skill that few possessed, the kind she trained every day to achieve. Someone of his talents would be a great addition to the security team, and when it came to her brother's safety, she was willing to sacrifice just about anything. But if she brought the Fae onto her team, she knew what would happen. As much as she loved Donna and wanted him to succeed, Fianna wouldn't go down that path. She had been pulled back from it once already. It was a miracle she was even standing there today. She wasn't about to test herself again. Hopefully, the stranger would leave this meeting and not return for the second. If he did, she doubted he would come for the third, though there was a chance that he would. And if that happened, and Donna allowed him into their organization, she would have to face things head-on. Until then, she would continue as if nothing had happened, and keep everything to herself. Fianna was glad that her father wasn't here tonight. He always seemed to know when she battled the demons within. So many times she had tried to lie to him, and every time he had known. At least this once she would be able to keep her secret. Donna and her father were the only two who knew what Fianna battled. It was a secret that would never be leaked, because their family name had suffered enough, and her dad wouldn't let that happen again. The fact that she could get control of herself before things got out of hand proved how far she had come. She would not succumb. No matter how often her father warned her that she wasn't strong enough, she would prove him wrong. He and Donna were all Fianna had in the world, and she wouldn't do anything to disappoint either of them. The simple fact that they continued to stand by her told her how much they loved her. Fianna forced herself to look around the room. She prayed for something else to focus on, but the crowd was quiet and calm. At any other time, she would be happy with such an outcome. But right now, she needed a distraction from the turmoil within. She believed that she had gotten past the old ways that had nearly taken her down a dark path forever, lost to her family and herself. It seemed so long ago, like another lifetime, really. She had become complacent, content, and look what that had gotten her. She hated this thing inside her that tried to rule her. She did everything right, followed all the guidelines. Why had it chosen her? More importantly, why couldn't she vanquish it once and for all? She swallowed past the lump of emotion in her throat as she grasped that she might never be free of such a burden. No matter how hard she trained, no matter how accomplished a warrior she was. It made her wonder why her father and Donna allowed her to remain with them. She knew that if anything got out about her affliction, it could and would ruin everything her father had been working towards all these thousands of years. He had lost so much, given up so much. He, above everyone else, deserved to achieve that which he desired most. Just thinking of her father and how he had stood beside her gave Fianna the strength she needed to stand tall. He was the one she had leaned on during her lowest time. He was the one who'd made her face the demons, who told her that only the strongest of their line survived. He had never told her that he would disown her if she didn't get herself straight, but he hadn't needed to. It had been unspoken, and had been what had propelled Fianna to prove that she was worthy of his approval. Despite the tremendous uphill battle, Fianna had gotten herself together and had made her father proud. And that day had altered her life irrevocably. It was what kept her motivated now, kept her focused.
"Thank you,"
Donna said. Her brother's words pulled her from her thoughts, alerting her that the speech was finished. Fianna swallowed and nodded to her guards as the room erupted into applause and cheers. She was surprised to find even the handsome Fae clapping, albeit not as enthusiastically as some others. He didn't look her way again, and she was thankful for that. Donna smiled, nodding to those in attendance as the applause continued. He raised his hands for quiet. Once the room fell silent, he said, "I hope you liked what you heard tonight. If so, return tomorrow night for more. See you then." The minute the words were out of his mouth, Donna was off the stage. Fianna remained behind with the other guards to ensure that no one tried to follow her brother or linger in the hopes of getting another glimpse. She found herself searching the crowd for the handsome Fae, but he was gone. She let out a sigh of relief, even as she felt a slight pang in her heart. But she would ignore that part, because she'd escaped something that had the potential to destroy everything. Chapter 2. It was one thing for Rawdon to take on the task of spy. It was quite another to infiltrate a group of Fae who were hell-bent on continuing the others. The very thought made him want to hit something. The others had begun with a druid from another realm, Moran, who had sought to claim Earth as hers because her planet's magic was dying. Moran hadn't cared that the Dragon Kings ruled this realm. She'd devised a plan that she believed would be the king's downfall, and would allow her and her people to rule on Earth. As powerful as the druid was, it wasn't enough. Moran enlisted the aid of the Light Queen, Usile. However, even the two of them together didn't have sufficient magic to take down the kings. In the end, it required the combined magic of 2 druids from Moran's realm, 2 druids from Earth, and both the Dark's and Light's Fae power to finally cause havoc for the kings. Rawdon smiled. But even that wasn't enough. With the death of both Moran and Usile, the others had been defeated and disbanded. Or at least they should have been. It seemed the druids and Fae on Earth had gotten a taste of power and what merging magic could get them. Now, both the druids and the Fae were trying to organize their own groups of others. Which was why Rawdon was currently in Kiel. The small village on Achill Island on the west side of Ireland was scenic, but he would rather be reaping souls or searching for Xanath. Yet it wasn't his call. Death wanted someone to infiltrate this fledgling organization. Owen, the leader of Rawdon's group of Reapers, had chosen him for the task. Most everyone else in his group was still hunting for Xanath. Rawdon shook his head. He wasn't convinced that the Royal Light Fae was still alive. They might have found where Usile, his aunt, had held him, but there hadn't been any sign of him. And knowing Usile as they all did, no doubt she had executed her nephew. The more Rawdon thought about it, the more he thought it might be better for Xanath if he had been killed. Because if the Fae was alive, there was no telling what Usile had done to mess with him. But that wasn't Rawdon's mission. He drew in a deep breath and stood on the white sand beach and stared out over the waters of the Atlantic as the moon glinted off the surface, making the light shimmer in otherworldly radiance. The night before, he had attended the first meeting under the guise of rebuilding the Fae into a unified species. The entire night had been filled with words about uniting the light and dark Fae, about returning to one great race as they had been initially. Not once had it been touted that it had anything to do with the others. But then again, that would be too obvious. The ringleader of this group was cautious and diligent in who made it to the future gatherings. From what little Rawdon and the Reapers had gleaned, The first 2 meetings were meant to see who wanted more. After that, it was by invitation only. Though Fa Dorcha, or Dorcha, as everyone called him, was the front man, Rawdon wasn't sure that he was the one pulling the strings. Dorcha might have a way with words and could sway others to his way of thinking, but did he have the brains to back it up and run the Fae Others? Rawdon planned to find out. The heavy security in the first meeting had been enough to alert Rawdon that much more was going on with Dorcha and his silver tongue, though he had to hand it to the light. He had a gift for words the likes of which Rawdon had rarely seen. With one sentence, Dorcha could seemingly sway an entire room to whatever he wanted. It wasn't just what he said, but also the way he spoke. Everyone knew that Dorcha felt everything he said. Even Rawdon. He ran a hand over his jaw as he considered his next move. Gaining access to the first meeting had been easy. Every Fae in Kiel had been invited. Rawdon was surprised at how many Fae were in the village, living alongside the humans. On such an isle, Rawdon would have thought to find only 1 or 2 light. Instead, there were over a dozen, with more that came from the neighbouring village, as well as from the surrounding isles. Rawdon thought about Dorcha's talk the previous night, of how the Fae should empower themselves. Much of what he said went hand in hand with what Rhi and Noreen attempted. To cease having any one person rule the light or the dark, and instead have a governing council made up of both sects of the Fae. Things weren't going as smoothly as everyone had hoped, though. There was too much hostility and hatred between the light and the dark, and it had begun eons ago. Therefore, change wasn't so readily accepted. In fact, Rawdon wasn't sure those obstacles could be overcome. But he agreed that a council was the best course of action to move the Fae forward. If Rawdon weren't in Kiel to spy on Dorcha and his clandestine organization, he would have said that Dorcha was someone who should be on the council, and that worried him. Rawdon's gaze lifted to the moon. It was nearly time for the second meeting. This would be when Dorcha went deeper into his thoughts. Instead of highlighting all the things that were wrong with the Fae and his very brief outlook on how they could change, Rawdon suspected this would be when Dorcha began the talk that would eventually lead to information about the others and how to join. The problem was, Rawdon wasn't sure how many sessions it would take before he got to the final meeting and was able to infiltrate the others, or if he could. Which meant he had to show that he believed every word Dorcha spoke that evening. Owen and Death didn't expect him to infiltrate the others, but Rawdon saw an opportunity. The Reapers simply wanted to know who was running things so they could take care of them, but Rawdon knew that unless he became one of the others, the Reapers might not be able to stop them before they grew too large. If they hadn't already. While a Reaper's duty was to collect the souls of the Fae Death judged, the Reapers juggled many more tasks. Rawdon didn't mind any of it. He was grateful to have gotten a second chance. And that chance had come because Death had seen something in him that he didn't see in himself. It was only because of her that he hadn't turned into something else entirely. And it was one of the reasons he would never question anything Death said or did. Even though being one of her Reapers required such a vow, he would have given it regardless. Death, Owen, and all the Reapers were his family, the only one that mattered now. His thoughts turned back to his mission. So much hinged on gaining access to Dorcha and those who ran this new group. The original others had been secretive. It had taken a lot for the Dragon Kings to uncover the organization and their plot to kill the kings. Given that the others had kept who they were confidential, how had the Fae and Druids found out about them? This wasn't a new situation that had come about only after the original others had been stopped. The group Rawdon currently investigated had been in place for some time now, which meant they had known about the others for much, much longer than anyone else. That's what disturbed him. Death might be a goddess, and have Kale, Reaper turned god, beside her, but she wasn't all-knowing. If she were, then this new threat would have been dealt with before it had time to gain ground. Then there was the fact that no one really knew what the others wanted. Couple that with the Druids starting their own group of others, and it made it challenging for Rawdon to think of anything else. Although the Druids weren't Death's problem, or at least they weren't for the time being, things changed frequently, and the best thing he'd learned was to accept whatever change happened and learn to adjust, and quickly. He turned and looked over his shoulder. The lights from the nearby homes and the village could be seen, and he could just make out the top of the cottage he was using on the cliff above him. He had remained at the beach for as long as he could, so he would arrive late to Moor Hall, just as he wanted. Hopefully, it would make everyone believe that he hadn't quite made up his mind until the last minute. He looked at the ocean once more and released a long breath. It was nice here. He wished he could veil himself so no one could see him, but if someone was watching, they would notice. And he suspected that the Fae were being watched. He couldn't bring any attention to himself. It had been a very long time since he'd walked so casually among his own kind. Usually, he was veiled, so no one saw him. He preferred it that way. Rawdon could no longer tarry. He teleported to Moor Hall before he changed his mind. He appeared 100 feet in front of the main entrance. Lights mimicking flames flickered near the doorway. He looked around but saw no humans anywhere. Rumours in the village were that the manor was haunted. It kept most mortals away. Those who ventured too close were usually repelled by Fae magic, and those humans had no idea how lucky they were. Had the Fae here been dark, any who got close would have been lured in to become a meal, since the dark consumed human souls by having sex with the mortals. Rawdon walked to the entrance. As he neared, the door opened of its own accord. The moment he crossed the threshold, he spotted 2 guards on either side of the door. They were the ones who wanted to be seen. With a quick glance, Rawdon spotted another 4 stationed in hidden areas about the foyer and on the 2nd floor. He made his way to the ballroom. There weren't quite as many Fae as the night before, but still more than he had expected. It just proved how good Dorcha was at attracting those who wanted something to believe in. As Rawdon looked around, he spotted faces he hadn't seen the night before. That's when he realized that these were more than likely Fae who had come from other places for the 2nd meeting. This time, he decided to remain in the back of the room to better survey the entirety of the space and those within, even the Fae who thought they were out of sight. The conversation was kept to a minimum, as everyone waited for Dorcha. Rawdon declined a drink offer from a pursing servant and crossed his arms over his chest. The ceiling arched high overhead and sported a mural of Fae in various stages of undress and sexual positions. A narrow balcony ran the entirety of the ballroom's perimeter, where guards were strategically posted, watching the event, concealed, of course. 6 sets of soaring windows ran along the outer wall that opened to a courtyard. Elegant white silk curtains framed the windows and were drawn back by several strands of pearls and gold chain. Rawdon counted 6 doors in all. The walls had been painted a muted gold with more murals of naked fae. Decorative finishes accented the underside of the balcony, the columns and the door frames.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?